He was, for a brief and brilliant moment, the best golfer in the world. He beat Tiger Woods when almost nobody could. He shot 59 in a final round and won going away. He lifted the claret jug at the home of golf. And then, almost without warning, David Duval lost the one thing that defined him, and spent the next 2 decades trying to understand why. At 54, his story remains one of the most quietly devastating in the history of the sport. Here's the full story. Before the fall, there was a climb that almost nobody remembers correctly. David Duval did not arrive as a prodigy who coasted on natural gifts. He arrived as a grinder, a relentless competitor who finished second on the PGA Tour 7 times before he finally broke through for his first victory. The wraparound sunglasses, the expressionless face, the cold and clinical demeanor, all of it masked a player who had fought harder than most to reach the top. And when he got there, he did not just compete, he dominated. In the late 1990s and into 2001, David Duval was, for a stretch, genuinely the best golfer on the planet. He won 11 times on the PGA Tour in a remarkably compressed period. He reached world number 1, displacing Tiger Woods at the very peak of Tiger's early dominance, which is a sentence that sounds almost impossible to anyone who only knows the later chapters of golf history. To be number 1 in the world while Tiger Woods was in his prime was an achievement that almost no one else of that era could claim. Duval did it, and then came the moment that should have been the beginning of a decade of greatness, the 2001 Open Championship at Royal Lytham in St. Anne's. Duval, who had come close at majors before without breaking through, finally delivered. He played beautifully, controlled, dominant golf on a brutal links course and lifted the claret jug. He was 30 years old. He had a major championship, a former world number 1 ranking, and every reason to believe he was entering the prime of a career that would define an era. There was even a famous final round earlier in his peak, where he shot a closing 59 to win the Bob Hope Classic, one of the lowest rounds in PGA Tour history, the kind of golf that legends are built on. That Open Championship at Lytham was the last individual title David Duval would ever win on the PGA Tour. Quick pause. If you remember just how dominant David Duval was at his peak, the man who took number 1 from Tiger and won the Open, type Prime Duval in the comments. If his story is one you find genuinely sad, type heartbreaking. I read every single one. What happened next is one of the great unexplained mysteries in golf. There was no single catastrophic injury. There was no scandal. There was no dramatic public collapse on a Sunday afternoon. The game simply began to leave him, slowly and then all at once, in a way that nobody, including Duval himself, could fully explain. The swing that had made him the best in the world stopped cooperating. The putts stopped falling. The scores climbed. And the player who had been number 1 in the world fell out of the top 10, then the top 50, then the top 100, and kept falling, eventually plummeting outside the top 800 players on the planet. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. A man who had won 11 times and been world number 1 became a player who could not break par, who missed cut after cut, who at one point went years without a meaningful result. He battled injuries, vertigo, and a series of physical issues that compounded the mystery. But the deeper problem was never fully physical. Duval has spoken with remarkable candor over the years about the psychological dimension of his collapse, about depression, about losing his sense of identity when the golf disappeared. And that is the heart of the tragedy. For an athlete like Duval, the game was not just a job, it was who he was. The relentless work ethic, the obsessive preparation, the cold focus that intimidated opponents, all of it was built around being a great golfer. When that ability vanished, it took a part of his identity with it. He has talked about the difficulty of separating his self-worth from his performance, about the dark places that the collapse took him, about the genuine struggle to find meaning when the thing he had defined his entire life around stopped working. It is worth dwelling on just how rare what Duval did at his peak truly was, because the passage of time has dimmed the memory. In the era when Tiger Woods was redefining the limits of the sport, dominating fields by margins that had never been seen before, there was exactly one player who managed to take the world number 1 ranking away from him. That player was David Duval. Not Phil Mickelson, not Ernie Els, not Vijay Singh, all of whom were extraordinary in their own right. It was Duval, the cold, sunglasses-wearing grinder from Florida, who climbed to the very top of the mountain at the precise moment that mountain had the most formidable guardian in golf history standing on it. To do that required a level of golf that bordered on the superhuman, and for a stretch, Duval played exactly that kind of golf, which is what makes the speed of the disappearance so disorienting. Athletes decline. That is the natural order of sport. But they decline gradually, in most cases, sliding from great to good to ordinary, over a span of years that gives everyone time to process the change. Duval did not decline that way. He fell off a cliff. One year he was a major champion and former world number one, and within a remarkably short time he was a man who could not break 80, who shot rounds in the 80s on the PGA Tour, who became almost unrecognizable as the player who had terrorized fields a few seasons earlier. The suddenness of it is part of what has always made the story feel less like a normal career arc and more like something was taken from him. There were attempts at comebacks, and one of them produced a moment of such bittersweet beauty that it almost made the fall harder to watch. At the 2009 U.S. Open at Bethpage Black, years after he had become a forgotten man, David Duval somehow conjured the old magic for 1 week. He contended. He climbed the leaderboard at a major championship that nobody expected him to factor in. He finished tied for second. For a brief shining moment, the golf world remembered who he had been, and Duval himself got to feel, one more time, what it was like to matter on the biggest stage. It was a glimpse of the player he used to be, and it made the years of struggle that surrounded it feel even more cruel, because everyone could see the talent was still in there somewhere, locked away, accessible only in fragments. But that runner-up at Bethpage did not launch a resurgence. It was a flash, not a return. Duval drifted back into the wilderness of missed cuts and lost form, and eventually transitioned into a career as a television analyst, where his sharp mind and deep understanding of the game found a new outlet. He has been, by all accounts, excellent in the booth, thoughtful and honest, and willing to discuss his own failures in a way few former champions ever are, and perhaps that is the quiet redemption in the David Duval story, the part that keeps it from being purely tragic. He found peace. He built a large blended family. He has spoken about how perspective changed his relationship with the game, about how losing golf forced him to discover that he was more than a golfer, about how the very collapse that devastated him also freed him from the obsessive pursuit that had consumed his younger years. The man who could not separate his identity from his performance eventually learned to, the hard way, over many painful years. But the tragedy remains, and it is this: David Duval should have been one of the defining golfers of his generation. He had the talent, the work ethic, the major championship, the world number one ranking, and the trajectory of a player destined for greatness. He was, for a moment, the only man on earth who could look Tiger Woods in the eye and say he was better. And then it was gone, for reasons that no swing coach, no sports psychologist, and no amount of work could ever fully solve. The career that should have produced multiple majors and a place among the legends instead became a cautionary tale about how fragile greatness can be, how quickly the gift can vanish, and how little control even the most dedicated athlete has over keeping it. At 54, David Duval is a survivor. He came through the depression, the lost years, the public humiliation of forgetting how to do the thing he did better than anyone, and he came out the other side as a respected analyst and a man who appears to have found genuine contentment. That is a victory of its own, and it should not be diminished. But when you watch old footage of him in his prime, that cold, untouchable brilliance, that swing that took number one from Tiger Woods, you cannot help but mourn the career that should have been. The one that vanished into thin air and never came back. The claret jug at Lytham was supposed to be a beginning. It turned out to be an ending, and the space between what David Duval was and what he could have been is one of the most heartbreaking gaps in the history of golf. If this story moved you, drop a like before you scroll away. It tells the algorithm to push these stories to people who appreciate the full picture behind the names. And subscribe if you want more of these, the ones that look past the highlights to the human underneath. There are more coming.